Hello and welcome back to 209 Prep Sports. Back in the studio with Scott Bryant. Getting into Week 10 and a review of Week 9. The playoff picture starts to clear. Some teams are just playing out the season. But all in all, it's pretty. I think the takeaway that all of us should have from this year is that we got them all in. You know, for having to gone with the kids and the programs and the schools and the families and the communities and the towns. Everything had to go through the last year, not getting to play. To get this full season in some instances, you know, there's had to be a lot of concessions made and a lot of people working diligently to make sure that the schedules are full and things like that. But more or less, it looks like the majority of the schools in the area were able to get a full schedule in if they were able to field the team. So kudos to everybody that put in the effort and made sure that was to happen. You know, the one thing I think that, you know, as Scott and I decided to start this podcast was more about acknowledging the kids and their efforts and giving them the opportunity to have some excitement in their life and be acknowledged for their accomplishments on the football field. So, and you know, in our area, you know, in the United States, you know, high school football has a huge relevance for smaller towns and even some of the bigger towns, as we'll see tonight. Stockton, St. Mary's, and Lincoln playing each other, so that's a big rivalry game, and you know everybody has, you know, there's a lot on the line. But just kind of getting into a review of last week, so we're not going to hit these games like we have done in the past with a lot of depth. We're going to hit some of them with some depth, but really we're going to focus on getting all the scores announced and trying to highlight the players that are deserving of the recognition. But really, Monday, we'll have a special show on Monday. We'll record earlier in the day because there will be the bracket release on Sunday afternoon at 1:30. We're going to reach out to some of the coaches and get their some of their ideas and input for what what the expectations for those games are for them. And then we'll go ahead and kind of announce the brackets, and hopefully maybe we'll be able to we'll be able to retweet and post the section brackets so everybody has a landing point and be able to find some of those games.
Yeah, Sunday, you know, it's neat to see. Sunday's going to be a big day for a lot of people. If you're a player or a coach on a playoff-bound team, I'm sure you guys are going to be sitting around the computer waiting to see how that rolls out, but definitely going to be one of the highlights of the season. It'll be really interesting to see how some of these matchups are determined and really how tonight's matchups may affect the Sunday bracket. So waiting to see there.
Yeah, there'll be not a lot, but there'll be a handful of games that are definitely going to be, you know, where you're at in the bracket, whether you get a home game, whether you get a bye, all of those things will be determined tonight. So tonight's not a throwaway night by any stretch of the imagination. Some teams are in need of a win tonight to get to their fourth win, which would qualify them for playoffs. So but before, we don't want to get too long-winded about today. We do want to hit on some of these games. So let's go ahead and start with the review of last week's games. I'll hit the first couple. Modesto Christian travels to Hillmar. Hillmar just has their way with them. Hillmar's a very good football team. Modesto Christian still in the rebuilding phase of getting their programs up and running again. But for Hillmar, it was kind of a spread the wealth type of a game. So 7 different guys scored touchdowns. Jax Jarvis had a touchdown. Noble Santos had a touchdown. Lance Cardoza had a touchdown. Westmoreland had a touchdown. Jaden Smith had a touchdown. Jason Pimentel had a touchdown, and Kazuki Mahono had a touchdown.
It almost sounds like the old, what's that old show with Oprah Winfrey? You get a car, and you get a touchdown. You get a touchdown.
On the receiving side, we had 2 more guys that didn't score running the ball, but you have Jax Bronco had a touchdown, and Luke Cox had a touchdown. So very good game for Hillmar. They had 348 yards rushing. We won't go through everybody's statistics. They're all relatively close anyway. They had 64 yards passing, so a 414 yard night. Pretty good for Hillmar. And Modesto Christian, again, deserving kudos for posting stats. You know, they didn't have the best night. 25 yards passing, negative 24 yards rushing. So it wasn't, you know, the greatest night for them, but to put their kids' stats in, some of them did have relatively good games. So kudos to Modesto Christian for getting their games in and acknowledging those players.
Yeah, for sure. Always like to see that. Next one we're going to cover is a playoff-bound team, the Linden Lions, taking on the Amador Buffaloes. Early on, first quarter was a pretty close game, 13-7, but the Lions stepped on the gas in the second quarter and just ran away with this for a final score of 34-14. We've got stats from Linden, nothing from Amador. On the passing side of things, Alex Herrera was 10 of 19 for 277 yards, throwing for 2 touchdowns, along of 49 yards with a great passer rating of 133.1. On the ground, you had Joe Cowan Jr., 10 carries, 57 yards, 2 touchdowns, and then Alex Herrera ran in another touchdown as well. On the receiving end, you had Jordan Sherman. He had 5 receptions for 129 yards and a long of 49 and a touchdown, and Jesus Fernandez also had a touchdown to round out the Lions' offensive attack. Defensively, you had a group of guys that were really getting it done on the defensive side of the ball. Alejandro Perez had 8 tackles. Jacob Lantis had 8 tackles. And is it Joe?
Jeremiah
Brentley had 8 tackles as well. And then, not to be outdone, Tony Cowan follows up with 8 tackles. So guys are flying around the field getting it done for the Lions as they take on a pretty good East Nicholas team tonight, and then look to see where they're going to be in the playoffs on Sunday.
Yeah, pretty good game for us. We went out and got it done. So proud of our kids. First time we haven't turned the ball over in all season in a game, so it was good for us. Moving right along, series went to Mountain House. Both teams put in stats. Series ends up losing this game 21-20, which could hurt their playoff picture. I think they have a win tonight to be able to make sure that they lock themselves in. On the passing side for series, you had Landon Hudson was 7 for 16 for 53 yards and 3 picks. The big game player this week was T. Lee Gill. Had 19 carries for 154 yards and 3 touchdowns. So pretty good night for him. And then Verlis Smith added 5 catches for 48 yards. On the Mountain House side of the ball, the leading passer was Amari Brooks. The sophomore was 8 for 10 for 87 and 2 touchdowns, no picks for a 144 passer rating. Leading the rushing brigade was Roy Gardner. He had 19 carries on 114 yards with 1 touchdown rushing. And then Osif Timmons had 8 carries for 55 yards. On the receiving side, we've mentioned these kids a couple times. Francis III had 3 catches for 27 yards and a touchdown, and Roy Gardner added 4 for 15 and a touchdown. So very good win for Mountain House. A tough loss for series. Again, I think needing a win tonight to help them secure their playoff spot. So again, one of those teams that this Friday night's actually really going to matter to them.
A couple scores worth mentioning. We won't go into stats on them. Los Banos ends up beating Lathrop by a score 35-14. Millennium gets the win over Delta Charter 46-6. Pacheco upends Bayer 40-12. Vacaville Christian beats Esparto 22-14. Let's see here. Nevada Union, a battle that is kind of outside of our purview a little bit, but really is a highlight game, and it has been for a long time, is the Nevada Union Ponderosa game. This looks like it was a battle to the end. Nevada Union edges out Ponderosa 50-42. Moving on to the Mother Lode League, what turned out to probably be the deciding factor for the league championship. You had the Sonora Wildcats end up beating Argonaut Mustangs 28-21 in a very close game. For Argonaut, you had Bo Davis had 7 completions on 15 attempts for 155 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. On the ground, you had Colby Eckhart carried the ball 5 times for 55 yards, and then Mateo Flores carried for 6 times for 30 yards and a touchdown. On the defensive side of the ball, you had Randy Fage with 6 tackles, Josiah Sanders 7 tackles, Caleb McElfish, who we've talked about before on this podcast, he had 7 tackles. Bo Davis, two-way player, getting it done defensively. He also had 8 tackles. But like I said, this game not only probably decided the Mother Lode League championship, but probably had a big impact on the seeding, which we will see on Sunday.
Yeah, you have Somerville has a chance to get a share of the title, so they would be able to split it should they beat Sonora tonight. So they have a chance. Sonora is, is the darling of the league, as they have been in the past. Somerville actually beats Calaveras last week 30-6 to keep their chance at a league title alive. I think it would be a 3-way split with them and Argonaut, because all three of them would have beat each other if that happens. So important playoff implications tonight for Somerville in the Sonora game. Big Valley Christian goes to Stone Ridge Christian, down to Turlock, wins 27-7. Moving right along into some of these other games. Central Catholic East Union was a really good game this week, as expected. Central Catholic ends up, and Central Catholic was down in this game early. East Union jumps out to a 14-7 lead, tacks on a touchdown to go up 21-7. I think Central Catholic comes back and scores 13, so they go into half 21-21 or 21-20 with East Union leading. Central Catholic kind of has their way in the third quarter to kind of separate themselves a little bit, but the final score ends up being 38-27. Tyler Wentworth for Central Catholic was 4 for 9 for 84 yards and a touchdown. Leading rushers were kind of split almost equally. Julian Lopez, the senior, had 17 carries for 188 yards and 2 touchdowns, and Aiden Taylor added 20 carries for 186 yards and 2 touchdowns. So a very good night for both of those guys. Leading receiver for Central Catholic was Brooklyn Cheek, had 1 catch for 40 yards and a touchdown, and Aiden Havelson added 2 for 31. On the East Union side of the ball, our old friend Luke Weaver, 21 for 37 for 293 yards, 3 touchdowns and a pick. And he also added 10 carries for 56 yards and 56 yards. The lone rushing touchdown came from David Flores, who had 5 rushes for 9 yards and a touchdown. Leading receiver Dylan Lee had a touchdown on 11 catches and 112 yards. And Kainoa Ontai had 4 catches for 101 yards and a touchdown. And Jacob Toast had 4 catches for 65 yards and a touchdown. So a very, very good game. I think it was a little bit closer than some expected, since Central Catholic's been having their way with some of the teams in the league. So very impressive game for East Union, who will also, both teams will be playoff teams. So there was some playoff implications in that game. So pretty impressive game for both.
Yeah, and just to kind of follow up on that, Luke Weaver, we've talked about him quite a bit. He's always been impressive, but to put up numbers like that against a very good Central Catholic team, I think that just solidifies the fact that he is one of the best quarterbacks
for sure
in this area. Moving on down the road, we had a battle of a team that likes to put the ball in the air and a team that likes to keep the ball on the ground, and that was the Kimball Jaguars taking on the Manteca Buffaloes. This was kind of an old-fashioned shootout. You had Kimball ending up beating Manteca 58-41. The story, again, really dials back to, could Kimball get it done in the air against a very good Manteca team? And they did. Nick Coronado, another quarterback that we think is one of the tops in the area, he was 26 of 44 for 500 yards, throwing for 7 touchdowns. That's impressive, because we know that Manteca is a very good football team, and to be able to put up numbers like that's quite an accomplishment. On the rushing side, you had Nick Coronado rush 5 times, 38 yards, puts in for another touchdown on the ground, and then Sebastian Tate and Zachary Lychak each contributed. Rushing the ball for the Manteca Buffaloes, you had Elijah Cotta. He was 15 for 144 yards and 2 touchdowns. Blake Nicholson, a kid that we love watching play, he carried the ball 8 times for 109 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then Marcus Brennan added 2 more touchdowns on the ground for the Buffaloes. Receiving wise, I think it's pretty notable to talk about some of Kimball's receivers. You had Willie Clifton, had 11 catches for 183 yards and 3 touchdowns. Mason Rivera had 7 catches, 192 yards and 2 touchdowns. Travis Mariero also contributed with a touchdown, as did Dylan Anderson for the Jaguars. On the defensive side of the football, we don't have any defensive stats for Manteca, but you had Mason Rivera had 12 tackles for the Jaguars. Travis Mariero had 15 tackles. Dylan Anderson had 12 tackles, and Ethan McGee had 11 tackles, as well as Zachary Lychak had 11 tackles. So you're looking at 2 teams that are going to enter the playoffs and cause a lot of problems for a lot of teams in the playoffs. So again, Jaguars edged the Buffaloes by a score of 58-41.
The report I got out of that game, Blake Nicholson was injured, I believe, in the second quarter or the third quarter, so that definitely affected their game. It's pretty interesting to see the stats. And just so everybody's on the same page, Nick Coronado got acknowledged by Sports Illustrated this week as Freak of the Week for that effort, the 8 touchdowns. Yeah,
well deserved.
And then the craziest stat to me this game, when you look at it, Manteca threw the ball twice. The whole game they had two passing attempts and ran the ball 55 times for 369 yards. So, like you said, I think it was a battle of wills, just trying to figure out how they're going to get it done. And Kimball's just a different animal as far as passing the ball goes. So kudos to them. Very good win. And Manteca, hopefully Blake gets healthy so they can make their run because they're well deserving of it. So moving right along with some of these scores, Lathrop goes to Los Banos. Los Banos walks away with this game 35-14. Downey takes on Grigori. What was anticipated to be a much better game than this, but Downey ends up winning that one 49-20. Riverbank goes down to Livingston. Livingston with Batista at quarterback just kind of handles them 55-0. The next game we'll cover at a little bit more in depth as one of those games that everybody kind of anticipated as the season goes on. I think it's every single time these two hook up with each other, it's going to be just an all-out brawl, and Ripon at Escalon. So why don't you go ahead and cover that one?
Yeah, so we had what would have a great impact on the TVL championship. It looks like Escalon's in control at this point. Escalon ends up beating Ripon 21-7, and what was probably a closer game than even the score dictates. Escalon had a 14-0 lead going into halftime, but then Ripon comes out and draws first blood and gets a touchdown in the third quarter, but then Escalon closes out in the fourth with another touchdown. Statistically, we've got Escalon, Rozovic, the sophomore quarterback for the Cougars, was 4 of 9 for 65 yards and a touchdown, and then they really got it done on the ground. You had Riker Peters, 8 carries for 104 yards. Logan Anderson, 6 carries for 30 yards and a touchdown. Baptista had 6 carries for 93 yards and a touchdown. Receiving wise, Owen Nash had 2 catches for 44 yards, and E.J. Lewis had 2 catches for 21 yards. And then on the defensive side of the ball, you had Riker Peters had 8 tackles. Caden Gonzalez had 11 tackles. Jameen Miller had 7 tackles. And Baptista helped out with 5 tackles. E.J. Lewis, 6 tackles, and Sebastian Snow with 5 tackles. So it looks like Escalon is primed and ready to go in the playoffs. Look for them to get a really good seed on Sunday. Yeah,
looking forward to that playoff bracket for them and see wherever both of those teams actually will land. Moving right along with some of the scores, Oakdale doesn't put in any statistics, but they beat Western Ranch 62-0. Another game that I thought was going to be a little bit closer than it was, and who knows what the inner workings of this game were, but Lincoln puts it on Lodi pretty good. They win 42-11. Neither team entered stats. Edison puts it on McNair. Edison doesn't enter stats, but they win 65-7. Here's a game that's interesting because there was a injunction placed. So what happened is, some people are aware and some people are not, but during COVID last year, some teams chose to play club football. And so the CIF caught wind of a handful of these teams. Ripon Christian, Capital Christian, one of the Vacaville schools, and I believe another school were all deemed to have gone against the wishes of what the structure was put in place as far as the CIF is concerned for playing football in the fall and spring last year. So those 4 teams played. Well, the CIF decided to put a playoff ban on those teams. Well, now a judge has intervened, and I think a decision is coming either Sunday or Monday to determine whether these teams are going to be allowed to play. So Ripon Christian adds to their resume. They go down and beat Gustine relatively handily. They win 24-7. You had Trey Fasani. He was 2 for 13 for 4 yards. And then rushing the ball, you had Micah DeYoung. He was 11 for 68. And then you had Grant Sonke was 14 for 91 and a touchdown. There was no reception or receiving the ball, so there must have been a couple of defensive scores in this game. Gustine Casada was 7 for 14 for 83 yards and a pick, and then they didn't have any rushing touchdowns. So it looks like there may have been some punt returns, kick returns, something like that for touchdowns. And so pretty good win for Ripon Christian, like an important win for Ripon Christian should they get the opportunity to participate in playoffs.
Yeah, I hope they rule in their favor. It just, we talked about this at length last year. I think I really don't like the fact that the CIF has the power to do that when realistically they were in my opinion, following COVID rules and stuff like that. Even though the CIF felt that they had it in their power to ban them. So hopefully the judge comes out and rules positively for them, because I think if teams have put up the record like you had just said, I think they deserve to go to the playoffs without question. A couple of scores, won't go into too much detail on them. It looks like Mariposa ends Waterford's pursuit of a perfect season, edging them out by 1 point, 36-35. Oristemba beats Denair 39-0. Chavez kind of has their way with my Yellow Jackets, end up finishing 50-0. I know it's not the way that Franklin is looking to finish out their season, but I'm excited for them as the future nears and watch for them to just continually get better under that coaching staff. Delhi beats LeGrand 56-38. Jesuit over Davis 41-15. And then we kind of had West, and I give West all the credit in the world. I know they've been struggling this year to go in and take the game and play St. Mary's. Unfortunately, it was kind of a pretty lopsided run, but I know, like I said, it's just really good to see teams still step up to the plate and play the game. Real quickly, just go over just a few stats for St. Mary's, which you can tell just by the way that their stats are that they really tapped the brakes in this game, even though they put up 71 points. Cruz Herrera was 4 or 5 for 81 yards and a touchdown. Rushing wise, you had Brooks Wheatley had Brooks Wheatley had a carry. Jason Calvin was 1 of 16 for a touchdown. Samson Hunkin had 3 carries for 58 yards and 2 touchdowns. Asante Carter had 4 carries, 83 yards, 3 touchdowns. LJ Parafina had 6 carries, 85 yards, 2 touchdowns. And Trey Carrito had 1 carry for 46 yards. We'll just kind of leave it at that, because I know, like I said, West is struggling this year. We sure hope they get things back on track, and we'll see the West team of old coming into next year.
That's just one of these. There's some situations that probably need to change in the next couple of years. I mean, you probably need to build a powerhouse league in our area, and get some of these teams that, I mean, it's kind of unfair, to have West taking on that St. Mary's team that, for all intents and purposes, gave De La Salle a game for a half, until they kind of just ran out of depth. And so I think if, hopefully the CIF at some point takes into consideration and puts maybe a St. Mary's, Edison, Lincoln, Central Catholic, Manteca type of league together that, where these guys can all compete with each other, and maybe there's some auto entries as long as they get to their 4 wins into playoffs, and it's really better in there. The reality of it is it's and I'll just speak on behalf of St. Mary's at this point, for basically a month. So 4 games. I mean, they barely were scored on. They scored 100, a couple 100 plus points. Their starting quarterback gets in. He's my son. We all get that, but he threw 41 times in a month. I mean, that's happening in a night at Kimball. So I mean, you just have some things that are going on, and it's somewhat unfair to West, and it's somewhat unfair to St. Mary's, and now St. Mary's plays Lincoln tonight, and that both teams have, Lincoln, they both played Lodi, who has been pretty tough, but everybody else, both teams have handled pretty easily. And moving into some of those games, some of their competition in the last couple of weeks, Tracy goes to Tokay. Tracy wins this game 41-28. On the Tracy side of the ball, Ross Escobar was 4 for 8 for 112 and 2 touchdowns for a 135 quarterback rating. The leading rusher ends up being Hoi Sai. He had 5 carries for 77 yards and a touchdown. Cody Lammerts adds 1 carry for 57 yards and a touchdown. Mason Myers adds 2 carries for 21 and a touchdown. Logan Murray had 8 for 59 and a touchdown. On the receiving side of the ball, Curtis Maynor is 3 for 81 with a touchdown, and Tyler Ward is 1 for 31 with a touchdown. On the Tokay side of the ball, and Tokay's in, and on the rebuild as well. Brandon Moreno, the senior, had a really good game. He was 19 for 34 for 285 with a touchdown. He did have a pick. but a pretty good, they've started to pass the ball pretty well, and Brandon's been a big piece of that. The leading rusher is Barrett Crosby, who's 15 for 41 and a touchdown, and Xavier Moreno added 9 carries for 43 and 2 touchdowns. On the receiving side of the ball, you had Andrew Magoza. He had 3 for 123 and a touchdown. So, and then the other Isaac Delgado has 9 catches for 65 and no touchdowns. But pretty good game for both teams. I think those teams are a lot more equal. So hopefully, when we get a realignment and whenever it may be the next couple of years, that there is some thought process going along to this competitive, and not competitive equity in the regard that everybody should be equal and should only play teams that are equal. You have to take turns at the top. But the reality of it is, getting beat 70-0 is not. There is no equity.
It's not good for either team.
Yeah.
And really, we've talked about this quite a bit. To me, the CIF needs to take their blinders off and realize that there's a better way to do this. There's, look at each sport individually on its own merits. It may not always be what everybody wants, but if you want to get equity or parity in any of these leagues, you have to. And to the point of, one of the examples I use is the English Premier League. We talked about that a couple of shows ago. It's like, have relegation.
Yeah.
Have the bottom 2 teams move down, the top 2 teams move up, and keep leagues in a manageable way. I mean, you can't obviously open it up to the entire San Joaquin Valley because logistically that just doesn't work.
Yeah.
But if you keep things within parameters of not only competition but travel, I think there's a way to do it that would make things better for everyone. And not only that, it will make the quality of the game better. It'll give kids more opportunity to get recruited. Nobody wants to go to a game where it's 56-0. I mean,
it's tough for both schools.
It even has that potential. Yeah.
Yeah.
So another score that I want to cover that's kind of like that, because it's a team that I always like following, and there's we've talked about the quarterback of this team, but in the past you had the Stag taking on Bear Creek. They end up winning 41-0. It was actually 14-0 at halftime. Then Stag really picked it up. But a kid that we liked and we've talked about in the past, quarterback from Stag High School, Angel Gonzalez, he was 16-25 for 277 yards and 3 touchdowns. Again, that's a kid that week in and week out, regardless of who they're playing, he's getting it done. Then on the ground, you had Willie Turner, had 17 carries for 67 yards and a touchdown. Tyreek Trahan had 6 carries, 19 yards and a touchdown, and then followed up by Travion Rouser, had 3 carries, 22 yards and a touchdown. So Stag getting it done. Again, I'm not sure what the future holds for them, but pretty good game that last Friday.
Yeah, and there's just a couple of quick scores. We're going to go Union Mine ends up beating Bradshaw Christian to take them from the undefeated ranks, which both of those teams, it has some playoff parameters. I think Union Mine ends up jumping to the D5 bracket. Bradshaw falls to the D6 bracket. Rosemont beats Galt, who also may end up with 1,600 kids in their school, end up in a D6 bracket. Liberty Ranch with nearly 1,300 may end up in a D6 bracket. So there are some things that went on this week that last week and now this week we'll have some determining factors on how the playoffs will align and things of the like. Just some important games this week. Obviously, the Somerville-Sonora game is very important as far as who wins that league. Somerville did get to their 4-win necessity to even qualify for playoffs, but a 5th win probably locks them into at least a better seeding, and then Sonora gets that. They're a past success team, so they would end up having to play in the D5 bracket probably either way. If they split it, I'm not sure how that's going to work. You have a 3-way tie at first in the MLL, so I'm not sure if it's a coin flip or how that's going to play itself out.
Mother Lode League used to actually employ the coin flip, so we'll see if that's the case.
Other games that have some relevance, obviously probably the biggest game of the night for almost everybody in our area is the Lincoln St. Mary's game. It's already sold out. I think it's sold out on Tuesday. So important game for them. Probably an important game for Ripon and Houston. Neither one want to go into the playoffs with a loss or off of a loss. And then the Livingston Escalon game should be a very, very good game. So,
yeah, it'll be interesting to see if Escalon's able to shut down Bautista. Again, another quarterback that we have a lot of respect for. So we'll have to see if we can hear from Frost next week, kind of get an update how that goes.
And then the Manteca Oakdale game is important. I don't know if Blake's out this week, so that might have some effect on where their seat. If they end up to take a loss to Oakdale, it'd probably hurt their seeding. So there's just a lot of things going on. Like we mentioned this week, they have the playoff seeding show. The bracket show will be on Sunday at 1:30 on NFHS Network. We'll definitely be viewing. Scott and I will start reaching out to coaches Sunday afternoon with hopes that we can get some input from what their expectations are on their matchups and kind of how they felt about how the seedings went and those types of things, and get their maybe their input on how they see the games playing out and how they like their bracket situation. Another huge game is probably the Kimball East Union game. I think East Union's a lot more game than most people gave them credit for at the beginning of the season, but everybody knows now that they're nobody to toy around with. So I expect that to be a shootout of all shootouts. I would expect one of them to be in the 60s or 70s and the other be in the 40s to 50s or 60s. So could be a very, very good game. So as we wind this down, we won't have a player of the week this week. I think there's just too many things going on. Too many teams don't have stats put in. I think everybody's kind of focusing, trying to clear the muddy waters for playoffs. And so that's kind of where we're going to leave it at this point. As we kind of head out the door, like we said, we'll have a special edition on Monday. Should be out early Monday afternoon, and hopefully we'll have some great content for you guys.
Yeah, for sure. Good luck to all the players and coaches that they try to position themselves for those few teams that are still trying to get in the playoffs. Good luck to you. Hope everybody that put up a great season this year gets it done. So we'll talk to you next week.
Yes, sir. Thanks. Thank you, everybody.